Echoes of the Ancients. Truth Buried in Time. Herman Forwood. Chapter 1. Huntsville. The shrill ring of the desk phone shattered the monotony of Eric Garcia's paperwork. He flinched, his pen halting mid-stroke. Grabbing the receiver, his movements were brisk, automatic. "This is Garcia." "FBI," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Yes, this is Agent Eric Garcia." "Who am I speaking with?" His pen hovered over the notepad, poised. The voice on the other end made him sit up straighter. "Huntsville PD," he repeated, an eyebrow rising with faint curiosity. "Near Ogden, north of Salt Lake, right?" "Yeah, I know the area." "Nice to meet you, Chief Davis. What can I do for you?" As Davis spoke, Eric frowned slightly, his fingers tapping the desk's edge. He jotted down a quick note, underlining it. "So, there's a deformed skeleton, and you're not sure if it's a homicide?" he asked, skepticism edging his voice. "How old is the skeleton, and what makes you think it's even a homicide?" I see. Have you contacted Ogden PD? They're already involved." Okay." His pen drummed against the pad. "Just trying to figure out if this is an FBI matter or something local law enforcement can handle." "Got it. I'll run this by my supervisor and call you back. The number on the caller ID works for you? 435-555-3258. Eric scribbled the number for good measure. "All right, I'll be in touch shortly." Replacing the receiver, he sat back, rubbing the back of his neck before exhaling loudly. "At least this gets me out of the office today," he muttered, reaching for the phone again. "Hey, it's Garcia," he said after dialing. "Can I drop by?" "All right, thanks. Be there in a minute." He hung up and pushed his chair back, the legs groaning against the linoleum. Rising slowly, he glanced around his office. The dull walls and scuffed floor radiated the kind of bureaucratic stagnation he had come to resent. Through the window, planes arced above Salt Lake City Airport, their rhythm once soothing, now mocking. Everyone on those planes was going somewhere. Meanwhile, Eric was stuck, his once promising career now dulled into routine. The year was 2007, and it was a typical fall Monday, dry air, lengthening shadows, and the faint scent of coming cold in the breeze. Shaking off the thought, he left his office. The hallway stretched ahead, in a long strip of flickering lights and echoing silence. Faded motivational posters, "Excellence is a habit," hung at intervals, their edges curling with age. Eric's footsteps squeaked faintly against the over-waxed linoleum. Somewhere, a phone rang, its sharp trill cutting through the low hum of conversation and the sporadic clatter of keyboards. Reaching his supervisor's door, Eric knocked. The sound ricocheted off the narrow walls. His hand lingered on the knob as he shifted his weight, his pulse ticking a little faster. "Come in," came the commanding voice. Drawing a steadying breath, Eric turned the knob and stepped inside. The office greeted him like a military shrine. Metals gleamed in polished frames, commendations filled the walls, and photographs documented Jim Clive's evolution from a fresh-faced Marine recruit to a seasoned officer. A gleaming saber and a row of meticulously assembled model fighter jets dominated one wall, each detail spotless, a testament to Clive's discipline. Behind the desk sat Clive, his broad shoulders hinting at his former strength. Time and desk work had softened him, adding a fullness to his frame that made his sharp blue eyes all the more striking. He typed with a slow, 2 fingers pecking at the keyboard. "What's up, Garcia?" Clive asked without looking up. Eric eased into one of the chairs in front of the desk, its armrests sticky with wear. "I got a call from Huntsville PD," he began. Clive stopped typing, leaned back, and ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Huntsville," he said, his brows lifting. "What do they want?" "They want our help with a skeleton," Eric said. "Deformed to be exact. Ogden PD's already involved, but they're stumped." Clive's interest sharpened. "A deformed skeleton? Could be just a fossil." "They're not sure," Eric said. Chief Davis described it as fused. Like a human skeleton, but not. He sounded pretty insistent that we come help him, and he also sounded spooked. "Spooked?" Clive frowned. "Calling us this early feels off. Fossil or not, Local departments hate involving us unless they have to. Why jump straight to the FBI? Feels like they've already hit a wall, Eric said, leaning forward. And they know they're gonna be stuck without us. Clive drummed his fingers on the desk, nodding slowly. All right. Sounds interesting enough to check out. You have the bandwidth, or are you swamped? Eric hesitated, a flicker of relief breaking through the monotony of his day. I can make time. Good chance to show we're here to help, not just take over. Clive gave a faint smile. Fair enough. When are you heading out? Just need to wrap up a few things. Early afternoon, probably. Clive nodded, his attention already shifting back to his screen. As Eric stood to leave, Clive called after him. Hey Garcia, how'd Davis get your name? Eric paused. Didn't ask. Good question though. I'll find out. Back in his office, Eric closed the door, the fluorescent hum filling the sudden quiet. For a moment, the room felt strange, as if he no longer belonged in it. In fairness, Eric felt the same every morning when he opened his office door. His gaze swept over the space, landing briefly on the narrow shelf facing his desk. Among the family mementos was a San Francisco 49ers championship plaque from 1995, its polished surface catching the light. A subtle reminder of simpler times, back when he still let himself care about things like football, back when hope had not dulled into routine. Dropping into his chair, he straightened the haphazard pile of folders and notes without thinking. His mind, however, stayed fixed on Huntsville. The chief's insistence, the word deformed, it all felt wrong. Then his eyes caught the photo perched on the shelf again, a younger version of himself flanked by his parents, their smiles bright and unguarded. He squinted, then got up and walked over to the shelf. He picked up the frame and brushed his thumb over the smudged glass. I hope you're proud, he murmured, the words carrying a quiet weight he was not ready to unpack. The mystery skeleton tugged at him, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. He reached for the phone, his movements deliberate now. Punching in the chief's number, he leaned back as it rang, anticipation sparking something unfamiliar, a flicker of excitement long buried beneath the monotony. Chapter 2. Gabe. It was past noon, and Eric sat at his desk, holding a sandwich in one hand and a diet soda in the other. Papers were scattered across the surface, but the pile was shrinking as he marked each file and set it aside. Humming an old tune, he finished the last bite of his sandwich and chased it down with a sip of diet soda. The crisp, familiar taste lifted his mood, as it always did, small comforts that somehow made the biggest difference. Glancing at the neatly stacked papers on his desk, he realized he'd made more progress in a few hours than he usually managed in an entire day. Something to be proud of, he thought. With his work done, Eric grabbed his bag and began packing for the trip. 2 pairs of gloves, a stack of evidence baggies, and finally, his Glock 17. He paused, turning the pistol over in his hand. Carrying a gun was never his favorite part of the job. He was not a gun enthusiast. His path to the bureau had been academic, rooted in analysis and scientific problem-solving. But field work demanded a level of preparedness he had come to accept. The Glock 17, compact and lighter than the full-size model, was more manageable, less cumbersome. To him, it was just another tool, required but rarely necessary. Once the bag was packed, Eric headed to the garage. His gray, unmarked Ford Explorer waited in the designated spot, ready for the trip ahead and ideal for Huntsville terrain. Before hitting the road, he had planned a quick stop at home. Years in the field had taught him to always pack for the unexpected. Eric lived in Salt Lake City's Avenues neighborhood, just north of downtown and conveniently on the way to Huntsville. The streets stretched in tidy perpendicular grids, lined with houses that ranged from charmingly historic to sleekly modern. His own home was a modest 2-story with 2 bedrooms, unremarkable, except for the small backyard where he occasionally gardened or hosted barbecues for friends and neighbors. It was a fresh start, a place free from the weight of shared memories that had made his last home impossible to stay in. Just a year ago, Eric's life had been rooted in Sandy, a postcard-perfect suburb just outside of Salt Lake City, nestled at the foot of the Wasatch Range. He and Katie, his girlfriend of nearly 3 years, had built a life there, until it unraveled. Katie's family had been warm and welcoming at first, their Reformed Mormon values aligning well enough with Eric's more secular outlook. But as time passed, and their lives became more intertwined, the differences between them became harder to ignore, carving rifts that no amount of reasonable compromise could bridge. Family dinners and gatherings, once easy and light-hearted, grew tense, with conversations tipping into arguments over deeply rooted conservative ideologies. After all, no matter how reformed a family appears, traditional values run deep and surface in unpredictable ways during social interactions. The warmth of Katie's family eventually cooled, replaced by quiet judgment, disapproving looks and clipped smiles that said more than words ever could. To them, Eric's perceived lack of faith and disregard for traditions seemed insurmountable. That unspoken tension seeped into his relationship with Katie, turning small cracks into widening gaps that even their best efforts couldn't mend. No relationship, no matter how strong, can endure the constant weight of outside pressure. With no children or even a shared pet to tether them, they finally agreed to part ways. Continuing on would only deepen the strain on their mental health and wear down what little connection they had left. By the time it ended, Eric felt both relief and regret. He had truly loved Katie and believed she was the one he would spend the rest of his life with. Even his parents and extended family were devastated when they heard the news, holding out hope that it was just a rough patch and that they would find their way back to each other, focusing on what really mattered. But that day never came. For weeks they spoke sporadically, trying to make sense of things. In the end, they both saw the same unmovable truth. There was a fundamental issue in their relationship, one that wouldn't go away and would only grow deeper with time. Moving to the Avenues had been Eric's way of starting over. It didn't have the sweeping views or cozy charm of Sandy, but the neighborhood gave him something else, distance. And yet, he still missed her. Her bright green eyes. Her infectious smile. But most of all, her unrelenting enthusiasm for life. She embraced every moment, whether it was hiking through Utah's natural beauty, baking bread that filled the house with warmth, or simply savoring her morning coffee with cream and sugar. Katie had a way of always looking forward, of finding joy in the little things, a rare and genuine quality Eric had admired deeply. As he packed fresh clothes and zipped his bag, the stillness of his home felt almost comforting. He'd bought a few pieces of furniture to fill the space, but it remained sparsely furnished, bachelor-like in its simplicity. Empty, yes, but it marked a fresh start, he reminded himself. A clean slate. A place to figure out his next steps, both personally and professionally. Bag in hand, Eric stepped out to the waiting SUV. Sliding into the driver's seat, he adjusted the rearview mirror and paused, taking a long, measured breath. The faint scent of leather lingered in the air as his grip tightened on the wheel. Doubt crept in, uninvited. Was this the career he'd imagined? Driving government-issued vehicles across endless stretches of Utah, chasing cases that barely blipped on the FBI's radar. His lips twitched into a faint smirk. It could be worse, he muttered, the words more for himself than anything else. Not a declaration, but a quiet mantra, a way to hold the unease at bay. The Explorer rumbled to life, and Eric eased it out of the driveway onto the familiar grid of streets. The neat, orderly neighborhood soon gave way to the open highway. As he merged onto I-15 North, the city shrank in the rearview mirror, replaced by rolling hills and the jagged outline of distant peaks. For a while, his thoughts drifted to Katie again. This stretch of highway had been theirs once, quiet drives and hikes through the northern mountains. The towering temples on the horizon had once felt foreign to him, their grandeur a stark reminder of how out of place he had felt in this city. But Katie changed that. Her companionship softened the unfamiliarity, turning Utah's landscapes into something that almost felt like home. His gaze flicked briefly to the distant spires before returning to the road. Their time together was long gone, yet he could not help but carry pieces of that life with him. For better or worse, those years had shaped him, leaving behind lessons he did not even realize he had learned. The SUV climbed steadily, the hum of its tires blending with the steady monotony of the highway. Yet, even as a boy, Eric had dreamed of a life beyond the fields and the limits of his small town. While many of his peers shared the same yearning, Few could break the generational cycle of agricultural labor that tethered them to thermal. Eric's ambitions set him apart. With a sharp mind and relentless determination, he excelled in school, setting the stage for a life far removed from the dusty roads of his hometown. The memory of receiving his acceptance letter to UC Berkeley stood out sharply, a moment etched into his mind. That letter was not just an invitation to higher education. It was a bridge to a new world, one brimming with possibility and adventure. For the first time, he saw a path out of the constraints of his upbringing and toward a future limited only by his own resolve. The university, and the town of Berkeley itself, surpassed every expectation. The campus pulsed with energy, intellectual, cultural, and social. Its streets were alive with a kaleidoscope of cultures, each interaction adding texture to the tapestry of Eric's experience. At first, it was overwhelming, but it did not take long for him to find his rhythm, embracing the chaos as an essential part of his growth. He threw himself into his studies with the same determination that had earned him a place at Berkeley, but life there wasn't all about academic rigor. The campus offered a kind of freedom he had never experienced. Late-night study sessions often gave way to pool halls and bars, immersing him in a vibrant social world he did not know existed. Live music, a rarity in thermal, became a revelation. The Greek theater, with its electric atmosphere, left memories so vivid he could almost hear them if he closed his eyes, a symphony of discovery and joy etched into those formative years. Berkeley, both the university and the town, had transformed him. He was not just a student, he was part of something bigger. The town opened his eyes to the limitless possibilities, reaffirming the dreams that had driven him to leave thermal behind. After earning his undergraduate degree, Eric stood at a crossroads: continue his studies in biochemistry or pursue a medical career. The decision came easily. A full scholarship to the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF, was too good to pass up. Their biochemical sciences program offered everything he wanted: the intellectual challenge, the sense of purpose, and the opportunity to contribute to something larger. He embraced the demands of graduate study, pushing himself further than ever before. By 1999, he had earned his master's degree, graduating with a wealth of research experience and a clear path ahead. That same year, he secured a position at a top biotechnology company in South San Francisco. It felt like a dream realized, proof that all his hard work and sacrifice had paid off. It was not just a job, it was the embodiment of the American dream, or so it seemed at the time. But everything changed on September 11, 2001. Like so many others, Eric had watched in disbelief as the towers fell, each image on the screen more harrowing than the last. The sheer magnitude of the loss struck him deeply, leaving a heaviness in his chest that lingered long after that day. It forced him to stop and reevaluate everything: his purpose, his path, and what he owed to the country that had given him so much. In the months that followed, the idea of joining the military crossed his mind more than once, inspired by stories of those who had answered the call, like Pat Tillman of the Arizona Cardinals NFL team. But as much as he admired their courage, Eric knew he was not meant for the battlefield. It was not necessarily fear or hesitation. He simply understood that his strengths lay elsewhere. If he was going to contribute, it had to be in a way that truly mattered. Seeking clarity, he found himself returning to thermal more often. Visits to his parents brought a kind of grounding he had not realized he needed. The sound of their laughter over shared meals, the comfort of their familiar stories, it all reminded him of what truly was important in life. In their quiet, unwavering way, they gave him space to think and the strength to decide. As the nation grappled with grief and uncertainty, Eric finally found his path. He did not need a rifle to serve. He could use his skills, his mind, to protect the country, working in a way that aligned with who he was and what he could offer. The SUV hit a bump, jolting Eric out of his thoughts. Ahead, the highway stretched like a ribbon of asphalt, flanked by distant mountains faintly etched against the horizon. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, the steady hum of tires on the road grounding him in the moment. But the past crept back in, pulling his focus away from the case waiting for him up north. Acceptance into the FBI Academy at Quantico, Virginia, was the culmination of many months of effort and ambition. Training was grueling, both physically and mentally, but Eric thrived in the rigorous environment. Each day brought new challenges, marksmanship drills, investigative simulations, and endless hours of classroom instruction. By the time graduation day arrived, he felt ready to step into the role he had worked so hard to claim. The Bureau wasted no time assigning him a post. Eric's unique skill set, his scientific background and ability to think strategically, fit seamlessly with the FBI's initiatives to counter biological threats. He was plunged into further training, immersing himself in scenarios that simulated the terrifying potential of biochemical attacks. But the world of counterterrorism was as volatile as the threats it sought to contain. Bureau priorities shifted with the winds of national security, and despite months of preparation, Eric found himself sidelined. Promising projects and task forces were put on hold, resources diverted elsewhere. For someone who was ready to charge headfirst into his new mission, it was a bitter pill to swallow. Eric did not let disappointment derail him. When the opportunity arose to retrain as a field agent, he took it without hesitation. The transition was not easy. Field work demanded a different mindset, quick thinking, adaptability, and the ability to navigate the gray areas of human behavior. Over time, Eric found himself assigned to a string of field offices, each new post adding another layer of experience to his growing portfolio. Eventually, he landed at the Salt Lake City office. It was not the most glamorous assignment, but it was steady work. Cases came and went, most of them routine, with just enough intrigue to keep him engaged. Still, he could not shake the nagging sense that something bigger was waiting for him, a case that would challenge him in ways he had not yet experienced. The road stretched on, the mountains inching closer with each passing mile. The hum of the SUV filled the silence, but Eric's mind was elsewhere, turning over the details of the skeleton in Huntsville. It wasn't just the case itself that tugged at his curiosity. It was the urgency in Chief Davis's voice, the mystery behind how the chief had even found Eric. "Maybe this is it," Eric murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the tires. A case that mattered. A chance to prove himself again. As Eric neared Huntsville, the town came into view, nestled against the foothills of Utah's mountains. The towering peaks cast shadows over the valley, their rugged contours marked by streaks of green and brown. A shimmer of water from Pineview Reservoir caught his eye, adding a quiet serenity to the scene. The tranquil beauty tugged at him, softening the tension in his chest. Huntsville's charm stood in stark contrast to the weight of his responsibilities, and for a fleeting moment, he let the stillness ease the noise in his mind. Following the center exit, Eric navigated the winding streets and soon arrived at police headquarters. The building was small and modest, more like a repurposed mobile home than the facilities he was used to. It fit the town's character, simple, unpretentious, and practical. Pulling into the lot, he noticed it was unusually crowded for a town of fewer than 1,000 people. Cars were crammed into the tight space, parked at odd angles as though their owners had arrived in a hurry. Finding no available spots, Eric parked his SUV along the curb and cut the engine. As he stepped out of the SUV and walked toward the building, Eric's eyes scanned the parked vehicles. Among them were an Ogden PD cruiser, a Weber County Sheriff's car, a lone Huntsville PD vehicle, and a mix of civilian sedans. The solitary Huntsville squad car seemed to encapsulate the town's entire law enforcement presence, a stark contrast to the scale and resources of his own organization. He glanced at his watch, just past 2:30 p.m. A small sense of accomplishment flickered. He'd made good time. The air outside was crisp and still, carrying a faint scent of pine from the nearby forests. As Eric approached the entrance, a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Small towns like Huntsville had a certain charm, a simplicity that seemed to promise clarity, if only for a little while. Pulling open the door, he stepped into the police station. The tiny bullpen was crowded. 5 people, talking loudly, their animated gestures filling the room with energy. But the moment Eric entered, the conversation stopped. Every head turned toward him, and the room fell into an awkward silence, heavy and expectant. It was a reaction Eric had seen more times than he could count. Years of living in Utah had taught him that more often than not, he was the only non-Caucasian person in the room, whether at a restaurant, an office, or even the local bank. The heavy, expectant pause lingered, and Eric knew it was on him to break it. "Hi, I'm Special Agent Garcia with the FBI. I'm here to see Chief Davis," he said, his voice steady and professional. "That's me," came a voice from the back of the room. The crowd parted slightly as a man in his 60s stepped forward. His standard-issue uniform stretched tightly over his round frame, and a thick, impeccably groomed mustache completed the look of a classic small-town cop. "Nice to meet you in person, Agent Garcia. We really appreciate you coming up here on such short notice," Chief Davis said, extending a hand. Eric shook it firmly. "Nice to meet you too, Chief. It's not a problem, we're always ready to help." He glanced back as the others in the room gradually resumed their conversation, the initial curiosity fading as quickly as it had sparked. "Can I get you something to drink?" the chief asked. "Some water would be great," Eric replied. "Certainly." "Hey everybody," Davis called out, quieting the room for a moment. "I'll be right back." He gestured for Eric to follow. "Let's walk to the break room and talk." The noise in the bullpen resumed almost immediately. "Did you find the station all right?" the chief asked as they walked down the short hallway. "Not a problem. I've been to Huntsville before, so getting here was easy," Eric said. "It's a nice town. Friendly people. I love Snow Basin Resort, great runs." "Oh yeah, the folks here are good people," Chief Davis replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "That's why we moved here from Provo." "You ski?" "I do, though not as often as I'd like," Eric said with a small smile. The chief chuckled. "I gave it up years ago, after I wrecked my knee. Haven't been on the slopes since." They reached the break room, where the chief grabbed a cup from a small stack by the water cooler. He filled it and handed it to Eric before pouring a second cup for himself. "Let's head to my office," Davis said, taking a sip from his cup. "It's quieter there." The chief opened his office door and stepped inside, walking toward his desk. He sank into the worn chair with a quiet creak, gesturing to Eric to come in. "Please have a seat," Chief Davis said, his hand waving toward the seats. "Thanks," Eric replied, settling into one of the chairs. His eyes wandered to the framed pictures of George W. Bush and Vice President Cheney hanging behind the chief on the pale wall. To Eric, these men weren't just leaders during the aftermath of 9/11. They represented a pivotal cultural shift. Under Bush's presidency, religion had seeped deeper into politics, cloaked in the language of compassion, but used to shape policies in ways Eric found unsettling. Initiatives that empowered faith-based organizations, the prominence of evangelical Christian support, and decisions guided by personal beliefs had cemented a new era where governance and religion were deeply entwined. To Eric, it blurred the lines between church and state, leaving a mark on the country that still lingered. The sight of their faces reminded him of how profoundly those years had reshaped America, changes he could never fully reconcile. The chief leaned forward, snapping Eric out of his thoughts. Resting his elbows on the desk, he met Eric's eyes. "If you don't mind, Agent Garcia, I'll get straight to it," he said. 2 days ago, some local kids were messing around in the hills. They stumbled on a cave and found a bone sticking out of the floor. He shook his head, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "Hot fall days around here make kids a little crazy, you know. They play with whatever they find. You remember those days?" Eric smiled faintly. He nodded, he sure did. "Anyway," Davis continued, "they start kicking and digging, and before you know it, it's not just a bone, it's a full arm. That's when they freak out. They run home to their parents, yelling and screaming, trying to tell them about what they've found." He shook his head and continued, "And you can guess the kind of panic that caused in this quiet little town like ours. We're not exactly equipped to handle this kind of excitement around here." Eric nodded. His interest had piqued. "So," the chief leaned back deeper in his chair, "the parents rushed to my office all talking over each other. To calm them down, I tell them, fine, let's go take a look. Figured it was just some animal skeleton, We've got plenty of those out here, as you can imagine." He chuckled, a self-deprecating sound, before locking eyes with Eric. "So we get up there, start digging around, and what do you know? It ain't no animal." He paused, raising his eyebrows. "It's human, or at least it looks human." His tone shifted, growing serious. "I stopped everything right there, cleared the area, and called Ogden PD. He raised his hands as he was pointing out his surroundings. "We don't have that kind of resources to handle things like that around here." He lowered his hands and rested them on the desk. "But bless their heart, they came through for us, showed up with their fancy equipment pretty quickly. They did some more digging and uncovering. By the end of yesterday, the whole body was fully visible, and they didn't even break a single bone. Imagine that." The chief leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "I'll tell you this, Agent Garcia. I think it's human, but it doesn't look quite like us." He gestured toward Eric. "I'm no scientist like you, but you don't need a degree to see something's different with this fella." "What kind of differences are we talking about?" Eric asked, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. Davis leaned back, resting his hands over his round belly. "Well, for starters, the head's bigger. The arms and legs are longer, and the thing looks stronger. Like a linebacker and a basketball player rolled into one. It's hard to explain." He shook his head. "Now, I believe in the Bible," he added, his voice lowering slightly. "All that coming from monkey stuff? Not for me. But looking at this skeleton, it makes you wonder." "So, you think this isn't just an average Joe," Eric said. "A prehistoric human, maybe?" The chief shrugged. "That's why we need your expertise, Agent Garcia. Ogden PD's folks are sharper than me about this kind of thing, and even they're stumped. That tells me it's more complicated than just some old caveman." Eric leaned forward slightly, his earlier ambivalence about the case melting away. "Where is the skeleton now?" "Still in the cave," Davis said. "We figured it was best to leave it there, in case there's more to it. Plus, nobody really knew how to excavate it, so we didn't want to damage it." He watched Eric noodle over what he had just heard. "So what do you think of Agent Garcia?" "We need to go, as soon as we can. Not much daylight left," Eric said. The chief picked up the phone from his desk. "Sounds like a plan. Give me a minute to make a quick call, and we'll be on our way. Meanwhile, talk to Detective Lambert from Ogden PD. He's in the bullpen, he'll fill you in." Eric stood while nodding. "I'll wait outside." As Eric moved toward the door, something caught his eye. A pair of wooden crosses hanging on the walls, paintings depicting Joseph Smith receiving golden tablets, and a well-worn copy of the Book of Mormon on the chief's shelf by the door. The room's decor was a quiet proclamation of faith, one that contrasted with the pragmatic tone of their conversation. He reached for the door, glancing back just as Davis began his call. "Good afternoon, sir, or should I say good evening?" Eric stepped into the hallway and headed toward the break room, the chief's words still fresh in his mind. He refilled his water cup at the cooler. The rhythmic glug of the dispenser sounded somehow amusing. Taking a sip, he stared at the wall, his mind circling back to the skeleton. Kids finding a bone in a cave, it was bizarre enough. But the urgency in Davis's voice suggested there was more to it, something deeper than a simple discovery. Eric set the empty cup on the counter and straightened up, his focus sharpening. There were too many unanswered questions, and he was eager to start finding answers. "Agent Garcia." Eric turned at the sound of his name, relieved to see someone taking the initiative to introduce themselves. Standing behind him was a young man with wide green eyes and an eager expression. "Hi, I'm Ben Snyder, but you can call me Ben or Benny," the young man said, offering a quick smile. "Hello, Ben. I guess you know already. I'm Agent Garcia," Eric replied. Ben nodded. "Yes, of course. Chief mentioned you were coming from Salt Lake City. There are only two of us in this office, and I'm the other guy." Eric smiled faintly. This case seemed to be growing more complex than he had originally anticipated, and he knew he would need to get acquainted with the people close to the case. "So tell me, Ben," he said, "have you seen the skeleton?" "Yes, sir," Ben replied, his expression shifting into something more uncertain. My dad says it's an angel sent by God to remind us what's important in life. Eric tilted his head slightly. He tried to keep his tone professional. Well, that's great, but what do you think it is? Objectively speaking, of course. He studied Ben's face, curious about his mental caliber. Ben hesitated, the confusion in his eyes deepening. He looked around and responded, I really don't know, sir. He got closer to Eric. To be honest, it doesn't look like one of us, but it doesn't look like any ape I've seen either. How are people reacting to this? Eric asked, also leaning in slightly. Your relatives, friends, you know. Ben scratched the back of his head, his gaze flickering toward the others in the room. Well, like my dad, most folks think it's an angel. They say it's a reminder. You know, reminding us about all the bad things happening because people are forgetting God. He shrugged. Not enough people are reading the Bible, Agent Garcia, that much is apparent. He shrugged again. I don't get what a weird skeleton has to do with any of that, but in a small town like this, people interpret things however they want. Eric nodded, his expression neutral. That's why we're here, to set aside speculation and figure out exactly what it is and where it came from. He gestured toward the room. Who else is here? The chief mentioned Ogden PD was helping with the excavation, Lambert. I'll need to talk to them. Ben discreetly pointed toward a small group of men near the corner. Ah yes, Detective Lambert is over there in civilian clothing, and the guy in the dark uniform is Sheriff Gibson. Ben then turned back to Eric, curiosity lighting up his face, as if he had a burning question for Eric. If you don't mind me asking, Agent Garcia, what kind of work do you do for the FBI? Eric smiled, appreciating the genuine interest. I'm a biochemical scientist by training, and was recruited by the FBI to handle biomedical-related cases after 9/11. These days, I focus more on fieldwork. I'm not exactly Agent Mulder from the X-Files, but my cases usually involve more questions than answers. Kind of like this one. Before Ben could respond, Chief Davis approached, his voice warm and familiar. I see you've met our Benny. His father's one of the finest members of this community. And Benny, he put his large hand on Benny's back, is shaping up to be a great one too. Ben straightened slightly, pride flashing in his eyes at the compliment. Turning to Eric, the chief added, Agent Garcia, let me introduce you to everyone. We're all going to be working as a team on this. Chief Davis walked over to the bullpen, with Ben and Eric closely behind him. He addressed the room, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of conversation. Excuse me, folks. He waited until the chatter calmed down. Thanks again for coming and working together on this case. You all know each other already, but I'd like to introduce the latest addition to the team, Special Agent Eric Garcia from the FBI field office in Salt Lake City. Agent Garcia is an experienced biochemist and has been with the Bureau for a while now. Eric raised an eyebrow but kept his expression neutral. How does the chief know so much about me? He wondered. He had not shared his background or tenure with him. Davis continued, when you get a chance, come say hello to Agent Garcia and welcome him to the team. Eric suppressed a wry smile. Welcome, he thought. I'm just passing through. I took this case to escape the monotony of paperwork, not to make a grand entrance. The chief clapped his hands once. All right, let's head back to the site and see if we can excavate Gabe without damaging it. We'll take 2 cars. Sheriff, you, me, and Agent Garcia will ride together. Benny, you're driving. As Chief Davis turned, Eric's curiosity sharpened. Gabe? Davis grinned. Yeah. Since everyone keeps saying it's an angel, we figured why not give it an angelic name. And who's bigger than Gabriel, right? Eric managed a small smile, though it was more out of politeness than agreement. He was not a fan of indulging such theories. It only fueled people's imaginations and raised expectations that law enforcement could not possibly meet. But the name was already a done deal. Gabe it is, he thought, resigned.